Good morning. Good morning. What are you doing wandering around back there? Okay. It's so good to see everybody here this morning. At least it's not snowing. Right. So welcome to HCC and welcome to those that are online. We're glad that you joined us this morning. Would you please join in, and we're going to sing a couple songs first. Great is the Lord and Lord Most High.
Great is the Lord, He is holy and just. By His power we trust in His love. Great is the Lord, He is faithful and true. By His mercy He proves His love. Great is the Lord and worthy of glory. Great is the Lord and worthy of praise. Great is the Lord, now lift up your voice, now lift up your voice. Great
Let's read together these words from Psalm 34. We will praise the Lord at all times. We will constantly speak His praise. We will boast only in the Lord. Let all who are helpless take heart. Come, let us tell of the Lord's greatness. Let us exalt His name together.
Your name be praised from the
singing nice and loud. Thank you so much for paying attention to the blessing box. You know, we promised to keep that full to help those people that were affected by the tornadoes, and you all have outdone yourself. So thank you very much for keeping that up. We appreciate it. If you're visiting with us for the first time, or in person or online, and would like to share your contact information, there are cards in the pew seat ahead of you, and there's one where you can, a connection card where you can put your name and your best contact, and then there's also one about HCC and what we do here and what we believe. Be sure to pick that up. That'll help you understand some things. So fill that out. We're glad you're here. Special thanks this morning I'm going to give to the music team. Would you give them a round of thanks for me? They come every week in practice. They work hard at what they do. They did an exceptional job for Easter, and we depend on them, and I want to thank them for their work. I also want to thank those who volunteer in the kids' worship on Sunday mornings during worship. Your care is gentle, your lessons are informative, and your love for the children who attend is appreciated. So thanks for volunteering. If you'd like to volunteer here at HCC, just let the office know. When you came in through the back doors, you may have seen these crosses that were sitting on the table. If you can see it from way back there, there's a bunch of them out there. Those are free. They have been put together by Norman Brummett, who's in our music team. He took the nails from Good Friday and made crosses and put them on rocks, and you can put them up in places. So if you want one, there'll be a rush at the end of church today. Don't knock each other down. That doesn't look nice. You may have one. If we run out, Norman will make more. So if you want one and there are none out there, let me know, and then I'll give him the total. And we need 150 more, Norman. He's repurposing the Lord's rocks, he says. This summer, the Lit and Latte Club, which is a group of people who read books in the summer from May to October, is reading a book called Ordinary Grace. And I've been thinking about the word grace in our lives. It's sometimes hard for me to wrap my head around the spiritual concept of grace. Simply put, grace is unmerited favor. It's a spontaneous gift, unexpected, undeserved, and totally free. That's the amazing part. Totally free. Nothing I can do or say can earn it, nor do I deserve it. My effort can't gain it, no matter how good and righteous I am. Grace is bestowed, granted, given from Jesus. Jesus freely offers his grace through his blood, and therefore provides those who believe in him with the forgiveness of sins. I can duplicate grace in my movements, but to mirror the grace of Jesus, I must put aside my desires. I must love those who are unlovable, forgive those who've done the unforgivable, unselfishly serve those I'd rather not, and do what's in the best interest of others, just like Jesus graciously did for me. So what does grace mean to you? Let me pray with us. Father, let us then approach your throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. And great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, we pour out our
So I'm browsing the internet and creative ads come up on Amazon. You know Amazon, that great store open 24 hours a day? There are so many tempting things I really do crave. But I also try to stop and ask myself, what do I need? What do I truly need? A want is much different from a need. You see, appetites we feed are never fully and finally satisfied.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. I had a question. I don't know if it's happening or not because I hear that they're leaving, but in one of the hospital visits I did this week, the individual said that I would be relegated to the little screen again, which meant they were going to be watching church online on their phone in the hospital and all that, but I just got a text message that said they're going to be heading home. So very good news on that and all that. So here's kind of a general, lighthearted question to start off. Ready? All right. What do you do when what you want, you know in your heart is wrong? Lighthearted, superficial question to start the things out, right? Yeah, so we all, at some time in our lives, face that question. What do we do when what we want, we know in our heart is wrong? The way we answer this question reveals the condition of our hearts. The way we answer this question can determine the trajectory of our lives. Anybody ever wanted something you knew in your heart was wrong, and you chose to do it anyway? And then for a little while, you really, really were glad you chose to do it anyway, and then a short time later, you were really, really sad that you did it anyway? This question is a question that isn't, it's our question, but it's been a question for people for a long, long time. It has been a question that the nation of Israel wrestled with as a collective nation all throughout their history, all throughout the biblical narrative. We see the nation of Israel pursuing what it wanted, though they knew in their heart it was wrong. And then for a short time, it was all good. And then eventually things didn't work out so well. And they regretted the decision. They cried out to God. God sent rescue. And then they did it again. Time and time again, this was their pattern. The story that we look at from the history of Israel today happens during a period of time when the nation of Israel was led by those who were called judges. It's a 310-year history in the life of the church. So Moses has led the people out of Egypt after 400 years of slavery because they pursued what they wanted, knew they shouldn't have, did it anyway, wound up as slaves in Egypt. And so Joshua took over the reins around 1300 BC from Moses after Moses died. He led the nation of Israel into the promised land, the land that God promised to give them to call home. And then before Saul becomes king in 1070 BC, there is this period known as the Judges. The judges that led the nation of Israel, sometimes the judges did a really, really good job. Other times, not so much. If you grew up in church, you likely have heard the story of 3 of these judges over a 310-year period of history. So the 3 that you probably have heard of if you grew up in church was a lady by the name of Deborah. So is this on the slide? Yeah, there. Nope, that's not it. There it is. I skipped one, didn't I? Sorry. Happens sometimes. So, go back to the first one, and we'll just run through that because I kind of ran through that verbally, but not on the screen. So the pattern that Israel demonstrated was they would rebel, they would find themselves in ruin, they would cry out to God, and God would provide redemption. And then they would go through this cycle over and over and over. Time and time again, God rescued, and time again, Israel found itself in rebellion, ruin, and in need of redemption. So the 3 judges that you might have heard of, Deborah, Gideon and Samson. So Deborah was the only female judge recorded in the history of Israel. She was instrumental in leading Israel in the defeat of the Canaanites in the Promised Land and as the nation of Israel began to settle. Gideon, as some of you are aware, was a fearful, wheat-threshing individual who hid from the Midianites, but yet God used Gideon to rescue Israel from the Midianites and to take the city of Jericho. So if you grew up in church, you probably know they marched around 6 days, and then on the 7th day, they marched 7 times. It was on the 6th day they marched 7 times. And then the walls came crumbling down. You probably sang the song. You may be singing the song in your head right now if you grew up in church, right? Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. Okay, so Samson. Samson's story starts out in what is an uncommon way, but also a common way. It's uncommon to us, but when you track the biblical narrative, it's a little more common than you realize. Samson's story starts out, once upon a time, there was a husband and wife who could not have any children. And an angel of the Lord visited them and told them that the wife was going to become pregnant, and she was going to give birth to a child, and this child would do amazing things for God. That's how Samson's story starts. Parents couldn't have kids. Angel of the Lord comes, says, you're going to have a baby. And then, because God wants to do special things through it, God established some parameters around the parents and the child. And here are the parameters that were established for Samson and his parents. In those days, oh, you know what? I skipped another one, didn't I? Man. All right, so the book of Judges ends with a very ominous warning. A statement that is warning. He says, in those days, Israel had no king. Now, Israel was supposed to be a theocracy where God was the king and his laws and rules would be administered through the judges. So that's the dynamic here. In those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. So Israel lost its way. Israel lost its way. And then God provided a prophet to get them back on track, a judge to lead them. Sometimes the judge got it right. Sometimes the judge got it wrong. But at the end of Judges, this period of the Judges ends with the author saying that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Can you imagine living in such a world like that? Aren't you glad that that was just an Israel thing thousands and thousands of years ago? Yeah, sounds real familiar. Okay, so Samson's parents couldn't have kids. Angel came, said you're going to have a baby. Baby's going to do great things. But here are some rules that you need to stay in within. So be careful. Talking to Samson's mom. So be careful. You must not drink wine or any other alcoholic drink, nor eat any forbidden food. You will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and his hair must never be cut. For he will be dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. He will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines. So his hair must never be cut. So this Nazirite vow, it was often taken by an individual who wanted to get God's attention. Maybe they had done something wrong. Maybe they had experienced tough circumstances or whatever. But they would make this Nazirite vow for a period of 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. In some really extreme cases, they would make this vow for a year. So their hair wouldn't be cut. They weren't allowed to drink anything made from grapes. They weren't allowed to touch anything that was dead or anything like that. And so this vow would be made. Samson doesn't get to make this vow for himself. As Samson grew up, his parents told him why his hair was a mess. Your hair's a mess because we can't cut it because you've been dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. You can't drink alcohol or anything made from grapes. You can't touch anything that's been dead, and we can never cut your hair. So that's why this is going on for Samson. Samson's, as he grew into an adulthood, Samson's first job was a border guard between Israel and the Philistines. Now, this is one of the times where Israel and the Philistines were fighting each other and constantly battling for territory and stuff like that. And so Samson's first job was a border guard. But Samson couldn't stay on his own side of the fence. Samson kept wandering and sneaking into Philistine territory. And when Samson wandered into Philistine territory, one of the things that happened to Samson is Samson's eyes began to wander. And Samson began to find things in Philistine territory that he shouldn't have. Samson began to find things in Philistine territory that he wanted that his heart knew was wrong. And so Samson one day wanders into Philistine territory, and the text tells us one day when Samson was in Timnah, and Timnah was in Philistine. Samson's not supposed to be there. He's supposed to be guarding the border between Israel and Philistine. He's supposed to be keeping the Israelites in Israel camp and the Philistines in the Philistine camp. But guess what he's doing? He's the one going back and forth. Timnah was not only outside the border of the Israelite camp, Timnah was outside the guardrails that God had established for Israel. And sometimes when we find ourselves in predicaments, sometimes it's because we stepped outside the guardrails. Not always. I mean, sometimes life hits and we live in a crazy, broken, messed up world, and sometimes we feel the effects of a crazy, broken, messed up, goofy, stupid world. And I know I'm not allowed to use the word stupid, but I'll use it multiple times in this message, so you're just going to have to adjust and be ready for it. So it was a forbidden word in one of the family's houses as their kids grew up, and so I know that, and I look for opportunities to use it just to irritate the mom. So, anyway, and so sometimes it's because we stepped across the guardrails. Sometimes it's because the world just hits us flat in the face. But in Samson's instance, it's often because Samson pursued appetites that he had that were never fully and finally satisfied. And so he kept pursuing what he knew in his heart was wrong. So Timnah, this Philistine woman, catches his eye. And so he goes back to his parents, and he makes a request of his parents. Now, this we told our kids growing up all the time. So we will be happy to listen to any request you want to make. But when a request becomes a demand, the answer is likely going to be no. And so Samson comes and he makes a request of his parents. This request is not really a request. It is more of a demand. He says, "A young Philistine woman in Timnah caught my eye. I want to marry her. Go get her for me." So, a young Philistine woman caught my eye. Samson wants something he knows in his heart is wrong. Something has caught his eye. He knows it's wrong in his heart, but he wants it, and he's going to pursue it, and so he asks his parents to go get her, because that's the way it worked in that culture. His parents also know that what Samson wants is wrong, and so they come back to him and respond to this request in this way: "Isn't there even one woman in our tribe or among all the Israelites that you could marry? Why must you go to the pagan Philistines to find a wife?" Now, in this culture, the Jewish law required Jewish men to marry Jewish women. It forbid marrying non-Jewish women and non-Jewish women marrying non-Jewish men. They just didn't, because the Jewish belief system was different than the surrounding nation's belief system. The Jewish belief system was predicated on monotheism, which means there was one God. The surrounding nations were predicated on polytheism, which meant there were many gods. And so anytime that a Jewish person of a monotheistic belief system married someone who was from a polytheistic belief system, the polytheistic gods, the many gods of this belief system, were brought into the marriage in some way, and then put the monotheistic belief system to the test. And God said, all things considered, it's best to just keep monotheism at the forefront and not intermarry, because when you intermarry, then eventually the belief system of the one God comes into play. Anybody ever experienced that in their lives? Whether it's money, whether it's relationship, whether it's job, whether it's whatever. Find anything that becomes as important or more important than the focus on the one God of our belief system. So, Samson, after going through this conversation with his parents, is not dissuaded from what has caught his eye. He says, "Get her for me. She looks good to me." Now, the phrase, "looks good to me," has also been translated, "she is the right one for me." So Samson has made a decision in his mind that what he wants, that he knows in his heart is wrong, is right for him because it catches his eye. And so Samson, it refuses to be dissuaded. Plans start getting made for this wedding to take place, and he and his parents begin to make their way to Timnah for the wedding. When on the way, Samson is attacked by a lion. And here's what happens. He says, "At that moment, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and he ripped the lion's jaws apart with his bare hands. He did it as..." Wow, that font changed. He did it as easily as if it were a young goat, but he didn't tell his father or mother about it. Now, this is one of the times in Samson's story where curiosity gets the better of me. If you grew up in church, you probably saw in one of your children's story lessons a picture of Samson. Who saw a picture of Samson growing up? Or if you had a children's Bible, whether you went to church or not, you had a children's Bible, you probably saw a picture of Samson. Didn't Samson look like Lou Ferrigno? I would say Arnold Schwarzenegger, which would connect with a lot more, but I was always more of a Ferrigno fan than Schwarzenegger fan, so I chose to be selfish and say Ferrigno. Didn't he always look like a bodybuilder? Big, strong guy. I wonder if Samson didn't look more like me. Because think about it. If Lou Ferrigno was attacked by a lion and beat up the lion and killed the lion, everybody go, "Wow, that's pretty impressive." I mean, not surprising, but impressive, because look at him, he's huge. But if I got attacked by a lion and I killed a lion with my bare hands, everybody would go, "Holy cow, how did that little scrawny squirt do that to a lion?" I mean, it would be amazing, right? It would be front page news if somebody like me did it. If Ferrigno did it, it'd be on page 47, a little tiny square in the newspaper. For some reason, Samson doesn't tell his parents that he got attacked by a lion. I remember when I was younger, I was riding my bike. I was leaving a driveway to go on the through street, and then there was a street right here. The driveway was here, the street was there, and then there was a through street here. Well, I took off across the street, did not know a car was coming. And the car hit the back tire of my bike, spun me into the grass off to the side of the thing. I got up, I was fine, no harm, got back on my bike and rode home. By the time I got home, which was not far, I all of a sudden realized, holy cow, I just got hit by a car. And it scared me a little bit. And so by the time I got home, I was a little bit teary and all that. My parents asked me what happened. I said, "I got attacked by a lion and I tore it apart." I said, "No, I got hit by a car." You would think if you were in Samson's shoes and you saw your parents, you would tell them, "Hey, I just got attacked by a lion." Yep, ripped it, shredded it bone by bone with my bare hands. And, I mean, you'd think but for some reason, he doesn't tell them. So, as the story continues, plans get made for the wedding, and they go And Samson poses a riddle around the preparations for the wedding about the lion that he killed. And the people who are his companions, who interestingly enough are picked by his future in-laws, so all the people around him are Philistine people, they can't solve the riddle. They go to his wife, and his future wife, and they intimidate her into getting the answer to the riddle. So then Samson realizes that they've tricked her, and he is infuriated. So he goes out and he catches 300 foxes, and he ties them together by their tails, and he sticks a torch in their tails. He lights the torch and sends them out into the Philistine fields and burns the fields. So, as you might imagine, the Philistines aren't real happy about this, and they rally troops to go and find Samson, and they rally the men of Judah and try to get Samson because he's set their fields on fire. In the meantime, Samson has gone home. His future bride, when he goes home, is then given to his best man, and Samson's out of the equation, now the best man. So Samson's mad. He goes on his way home, and as he goes on his way home, he encounters the same lion, but this time the lion's dead. And a swarm of bees have built a honey nest inside the carcass of the dead lion. And here's what Samson decided. Powerfully upon Samson, and he snapped the ropes on his arms as if they were burnt strands of flax, and they fell from his wrists. Then he found the jawbone of a recently killed donkey. He picked it up and killed 1,000 Philistines with it. He found the jawbone of what? A recently killed donkey. So he picks up the jawbone of a dead donkey, which is once again violating the Nazirite vow. He is so focused on what he wants that he knows in his heart is wrong, that he just continues to pursue. Now, again, impressive that he can break ropes, and impressive that he can kill 1,000 Philistines and all of that. I still wonder if he looked more like me than Lou Ferrigno, but it's something I'll have to wonder about the rest of my life. So Samson continues to go back and forth between the Philistine and the Israel territory. Even after all this stuff has gone on, he still goes back and forth. And when we read the rest of this story, when we walk through the rest of this story, there will be times in this story where we will ask the question, can anyone really be this stupid? Sorry. And of course, we all know the answer, because the person sitting next to us has been that stupid. And we've seen it in them. We've never seen it in ourselves, but we've seen it in everyone else. Because this is what happens. We get so focused on what we want, even when we know it's not, when it's wrong in our heart, that we continue to pursue, we continue to go. And what happens next? We are introduced to probably Samson's most famous counterpart. And when we are introduced to this most famous counterpart, the story from here on out is just an amazing story of asking this question, could anybody really do this? Could anybody really do this? What does it take for the light bulb to go on? So here's what happens in the story. Sometime later, Samson fell in love with a woman named Delilah, who lived in the valley of Sorek. Guess where Sorek is? You want any guess? Sorek's in the Philistine camp. So Samson is once again where he's not supposed to be, looking for what he's not supposed to be looking for. But this time it's different. This time, he fell in love. Before, she just looked good to him. You know, go get her. She looks good to me. She's the right one for me. This time, Samson falls in love. And once he falls in love, he begins to navigate this relationship. So Delilah is a Philistine woman. And the Philistines are the very people who Samson burned their fields, killed 1,000 of them, and the people haven't forgotten that. And so the leaders of the Philistines come to Delilah after she and Samson are now officially an item. They come and they ask her. They said, entice. And the word entice there is a very, very powerful word. The New International Version uses the word lure. Lure Samson. Any fishermen in the room? No. Wow, no fishermen. Hey, where's Clint? Call him right now. Tell him to explain to us over the phone. A fishing lure. What is a fishing lure? A fishing lure is a representation of something that is presented in a way that is enticing. And what does a lure have on it? And what is the purpose of the hook? To catch. So it says, lure Samson, entice him, make a representation of something that is appealing, that is enticing, so that whenever he takes the bait, we can then hook him and catch him. So, entice Samson to tell you what makes him so strong and how he can be overpowered and tied up securely. Then each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. Now, it's a little difficult to calculate inflation over the period of 4,000 years. But 1,100 pieces of silver at that time would have equated to about $90,000 of our money. And so at first glance, we're like, wow, they're going to offer her $90,000. No, what it says is each of us will give you $90,000, which begs the question, how many of them were there? Because if there were 10 of them, that's $900,000. Each of them will give her. So she's got a lot riding on this. Now, all they want is, they just want to get to Samson. That's all they care about, is getting to Samson. They hate Samson. They haven't forgotten about the foxes. They haven't forgotten about the fields. They haven't forgotten about the 1,000 Philistines that he killed with the jawbone. They haven't forgotten any of that. And they haven't forgotten how much they hate him. So they go to her and they say, we'll give you 1,100, each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver if you can entice him to tell you the secret of what makes him so strong. So Delilah, for some reason, is all in. And she goes to Samson and she asks, please tell me what makes you so strong and what it would take to tie you up securely. Now, at some point, this seems like a pretty straightforward question, and it seems pretty clear what Delilah's up to. This doesn't strike me as a passing dinner-type conversation where it's like, oh, hey, by the way, tell me what makes you so... I mean, if she left it there, tell me what makes you so strong. Okay, let's have conversation about that. But when she adds the next part, and what it would take to tie you up securely. There's a lot of different directions you can go with that, but I think it's pretty safe to say that Samson's got to know Delilah's up to no good. That this isn't going to end well. And you would think that Samson would say, I'm not going to tell you that. You know, I mean, this seems a little fishy. But Samson doesn't do that. Samson says, if I were tied up with 7 new bowstrings that have not been dried, I would become as weak as anyone else. It's almost like Samson is saying, God wanted to do something amazing through me. He told my parents at my birth that he wanted to do something amazing through me. And he told me that to maintain doing something amazing through me, that I couldn't cut my hair, and I couldn't drink anything, and I couldn't touch anything dead. Well, I screwed the other ones up, but my hair's never been cut. And for some reason, God still has extended his grace to me in this. But I also have the choice to be just like everyone else. And you would think, right? You would think, given the two options between being the person that God has chosen to do something special through, or being like everyone else, the choice would be a no-brainer. Could anyone be stupid enough to choose being like everyone else when you can be who God wants you to be? I mean, would anybody ever be that dumb? So, Delilah, the leaders of the Philistines bring Delilah 7 new bowstrings that have never been dried. And she ties Samson up with them. And then the story tells us, and this is like really, really weird to me. I would love to know an answer as to why. Well, you know why, but how she pulled it off. It says, with men waiting in the room. And I'm like, okay, so men are waiting in the room. So she says, Samson, the Philistines are here to get you. And Samson wakes up, jumps up, breaks the strings, and Delilah's disappointed. He runs the Philistines off, and Delilah's disappointed. And so she then comes back to Samson and says, please, she again comes back and tells him, go ahead and go to the next slide for me, Krista. She says, but Samson snapped the bowstrings as a piece of string snaps when it is burned by a fire. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Delilah's upset by this, and she goes to Samson and says, go ahead, you've been making fun of me. You've been making fun of me and telling me lies. Now, please tell me how you can be tied up securely. Notice what she doesn't say this time. She doesn't say, tell me why you're so strong. She just jumps right to the point. Please tell me how you can be tied up securely. Now, if you're Samson and you've already told her the first time about the 7 bowstrings and she ties you up with them and then says the Philistines are here and you got to run the Philistines off, and then she comes back and asks a second time, I mean, I think I'm telling her no. I'm not going to tell you my secret. But Samson says, if I were tied up with brand new ropes that have never been used, I would become as weak as anyone else. So Delilah says, finally, you've told me the truth, and now I can trust you. And she and Samson live happily ever after. Now, my guess is you know that's not what happens next in the story. She gets 7 ropes. She gets brand new ropes. She ties him up. People waiting in the room. She calls out, Samson, the Philistines are here to get you. He jumps up, breaks the ropes, runs off the Philistines, and Delilah's disappointed. So she asks him again, tell me the secret. And he says to her this time, if you were to weave the 7 braids of my hair, fabric on your loom, and tighten it with the loom shuttle, I would become as weak as anybody else. I mean, seriously, can anybody be this stupid? I mean, really, come on. The first time you told her, she tied you up, called the Philistines in. The second time she tied you up, called the Philistines in. What do you think is going to happen here? Samson, seriously, what do you think is going to happen? You think she's going to weave your hair in the loom shuttle and then call the Philistines in? That's exactly what she does. She weaves his hair in the loom thing, calls them in. He breaks the loom shuttle, runs off the Philistine, and Delilah's disappointed. And Samson's an idiot. I mean, Samson continues to get so focused on what has caught his eye that he knows is wrong in his heart, that he continues to just dig this hole over and over and over. So Delilah is so disappointed this time that she adds pouting into the mix. She starts to pout. And then she turns the manipulation of Samson up a whole nother level. And it says, that she says, how can you tell me I love you when you don't share your secrets with me? It's real easy like this. I love you. You've made fun of me 3 times now. And you still haven't told me what makes you so strong. She tormented him. She tormented him with her nagging day after day until he was sick to death of it. So guess what? This is what works. Her nagging finally works. And the interesting thing is, when he talked about the looms of the hair, if you'll notice the pattern, if you tie me with these, and if you tie me with these, well, if you braid the hair into the loom. Remember, it was the hair that couldn't be cut. It was the hair that was part of the Nazirite vow. So Samson creeps closer and closer to the guardrail. Samson creeps closer and closer to revealing what the guardrail that God has put in place. And so she tormented him day after day, nagging day after day after day. And finally, he's just sick to death. I'd love to know how long it went. If Samson's like any other normal guy, it was probably like 2 days. Like 2 days of nagging. I can't take it anymore. What do you want? I'll tell you whatever you want. I'll give you whatever you want. So Samson tells her, my hair has never been cut, for I was dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. And I have to wonder, when Samson uttered the words, I have been dedicated to God, I wonder if there was even pause in his heart. I wondered if there was ever a moment where Samson said, I was dedicated to God from birth. An angel told my parents about me. An angel told the parents the parameters. An angel said that I was going to do special things. An angel said, just like the nation of Israel was to be a light to the other nations, just like Samson's story parallels Israel's stories, that God wanted to do something special through the nation of Israel. So he set them apart. And he wanted them to be a light to the other nations so that the other nations could see the amazing things that God did through Israel and go, wow, Israel's one God is the God we're serving. And that's what he wanted to accomplish through Samson. Just like Samson, he wanted to do amazing things through Samson so that the surrounding nations would see the amazing things done and go, wow, Samson's God is the one true God and the God we should follow. That's what he wanted. And I wonder if this moment when he's telling the secret to Delilah, when he utters those words, I was dedicated to God, I wonder if Samson paused and went, and how did I get here? How did I get where I am? You got there on purpose. You chose to cross the guardrails. You chose to cross the border. You chose to go into Philistine. You chose to marry the woman. You chose Delilah. And I wonder if in that moment, if dedicated to God meant anything to Samson. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as anyone else. Samson repeats this. And I would become as weak as anyone else. He repeats it every time he gives her the answer. So, here's what happens next. Delilah lulled Samson to sleep with his head on her lap. She called in a man to shave off the 7 locks of his hair. In this way, she began to bring him down, and his strength left him. A short time later, Delilah utters the words, the Philistines are here to get you again. And Samson awakes, fully expecting everything to be as they were before. But this time things are different. When Samson awakes, he does not realize that his strength has left him, but it takes a very short order of time before he realizes that his strength has left him. And it says, so the Philistines captured him, and they gouged out his eyes. They took him to Gaza, where he was bound with bronze chains and forced to grind grain in the prison. Samson led Israel as a judge for about 20 years. And now he's a prisoner in the very Philistine camps that he refused to stay out of. And he's bound with bronze chains, and he's forced to grind grain in the prison. Samson dies in Philistine territory. Samson dies a prisoner of the very appetites he pursued that were never fully and finally satisfied. Samson died as the result of pursuing what caught his eye, even when he knew in his heart it was wrong. Samson died in the Philistine camps, having stepped outside the guardrails that God had put in place for his protection. Well, having captured Samson, sometime later, the Philistines decide to hold a great victory celebration, a big party to celebrate their victory. And somebody has the idea, hey, let's bring Samson in and let's have him entertain us. We're going to make fun of him. He's blind, he's weak, he's frail, he's tired. Let's bring Samson in. And so they bring Samson in. And unbeknownst to them, Samson's hair had begun to grow back. Well, not unbeknownst, I'm sure they saw, but not realizing why. Samson's hair began to grow and Samson's strength began to return. And Samson stood between the two pillars of the building where they were having the party. And he asked God for one more act of strength. One more act of grace. And Samson prayed that God would remember him and that God would restore his strength one more time. And the story tells us that as Samson pushed on the pillars, it tells us, and the temple crashed down on the Philistine rulers and all the people. So he killed more people when he died than he had during his entire lifetime. One more act of strength from Samson because of one more act of grace from God. So what do? When what you want, you know in your heart is wrong? Instead of being trapped by whatever catches our eye, discover and relentlessly pursue what God desires. How many different times in Samson's story could he have made a different decision? How many times in Samson's story could he have walked away from the enticement? How many times in Samson's story could he have stayed within the guardrails? How many times in Samson's story could it have turned out differently? And at some point, the only reason Samson's story turned out as it did is because of the grace of God. And sometimes the only reason your story and my story turns out the way it does is because of the grace of God. And so today, as we leave, and it was kind of amazing because, sometimes we plan things really, really well. Sometimes really, really cool things happen that we don't plan. In Diane's greeting, she talked about grace. And we come full circle back around at the end of the message to grace. That wasn't planned. And so today, as we leave, let's just be grateful for God's grace. And maybe even try to do our best to keep him from having to use it so much. Because Samson could have kept him from having to use it so much. And I think sometimes we put God in the position to extend his grace more and more and more because could anybody really be that stupid? Apparently so. Let me pray for us and then we'll be out of here for today. Dear God, thank you for today. Thank you for this incredible story of Samson, through whom you chose to do great things. And thank you for the parameters that thank you for the parameters that you established for Samson. And in some ways, thank you that Samson stepped out of them, because if Samson stepped out of them and you gave him grace, maybe when I've stepped out of them, you can give me grace. And so, God, this morning as we wrap things up, we just thank you for your grace. We ask that we would be grateful for your grace and that you would help us not put you in the position to have to use it so much. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we'll roll the preview video for next Sunday. When that preview video is over, we're dismissed. And have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you next time.
Small decisions. We make them every day. They seem just like little unimportant things, but the outcomes of these decisions could be huge. I make a decision to not answer a call and find out later that someone needed my help. Or I decide that I'm just too tired to bring the plants inside because the forecast isn't that cold, and all the plants die. Seemingly small decisions with big consequences. The decisions of Ruth and Boaz from the book of Ruth seem inconsequential, but reap great results in the history of Israel.